back, it's Donwozi here, and today I'm going to be showing you the Magicka Sorcerer non-pet build for the Dragonbones DLC. This build is very strong. It seems a lot stronger than last patch, single target wise, and Sorcerers are really powerful in AoE. So I think anyone who's a Sorcerer is going to really enjoy this patch. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the build. Also, I'm gonna showcase the build, and then at the end of the clip, there's gonna be two DPS tests, two clips of DPS tests, one on the 3mm dummy and one on the 6mm dummy. So if you just want to see the tests, just skip to the end of the video for them two tests. So without further ado, I'm gonna get into the build. So the fully buff stats: 43k Magicka, 16.6k health, 11,000 stamina, 2,958 spell damage, 41.9% crit, and 1,557 Magicka recovery. We have 56 points into Magicka and 8 points into health. With Eben, we would be on 17.6k health, which I find enough in trials. If you feel like you ain't got enough health, then I would suggest taking points out of the Magicka and putting it into health. If you feel like you've got too much health, then just put all 64 points into Magicka. The boon we're using is the Apprentice. We are a stage 4 vampire, and our race is high elf. So now I'm going to get into the gear. Well, I'm going to show you the consumables first. Obviously, we have double Bloody Mary, which I always recommend to carry around when you want to reduce your vampire stage. And the food we're using is Clockwork Citrus Fillet, or however you want to pronounce it, which increases max health by 3,724, health recovery by 351, max Magicka by 3,457, and magic recovery by 319. If you cannot afford to use this food, then I would suggest running Witch Mother's Brew. There's only slight differences. You only get a little bit more max magic and a little bit more max health, and obviously you get the health recovery. The Magicka recovery is the exact same for both foods, but obviously Witch Mother's is a cheaper option, and if you're wanting to min-max in your group, then I would suggest the Clockwork City food. The potions we're using are Essence of Spell Power, which give you Major Sorcery, Major Prophecy, and Major Intellect, which increases your spell damage by 20% for 47.6 seconds. Increases your spell crit by 2,191, which is basically 10%. And increases Magicka recovery by 20% for 47.6 seconds. There are two skill setups to this build, and it's just about preference, I guess. So because I double bar in a light, I don't really need to use the Major Prophecy, so you could probably save some regents if you run the skill bars the way I run them. But if you don't, and you still want to use the execute on the back bar, then I would suggest on keeping the Major Prophecy. So now I'm going to go over the gear. On the front bar we have an Asylum Perfected Inferno Staff, which is infused with a shock damage enchant. If you want to do more DPS in a trial, then I would suggest the fire enchant, even though the shock enchant does really good damage because we are a high elf and we get amplifications to lightning damage or shock damage. So the damage difference isn't much on a high elf than it would be on a dark elf or something like that. Also, because we're using the Perfected Inferno Staff and we get the Burning, Concussed and Chill status effects, which also do direct damage, you can also use the Absorb Magic enchantment for some more sustain. So if you struggle with sustain, then I would suggest using that. If you have enough concussion uptime in your group, then I would suggest taking the fire damage glyph. But as of right now, and I take the shock damage glyph, and for solo, the shock damage glyph is probably the best. On the back bar, we're running a Maelstrom Lightning Staff infused with a Berserker enchant, which increases your weapon and spell damage by 452 for 5 seconds. In AoE, if you have more AoE damage over times on your back bar, then infused is better. But it's only slightly better, so if you still have a Nirnhound from last patch, don't retrait it. You might as well just keep with it, because the damage difference is minimal. The monster set we're using is the 2-piece Alambris. If you're in close quarter fights within 10 meters, then I would suggest using the 2-piece Zans, because it is overall better single target. In solo tests, I didn't see that much of a difference between Zans and Alambris, but they were not optimal. The Zans was not optimal traits, so they were pretty much even with the Zans not being optimal traits. So I reckon the Zans would just fall ahead of the Alambris solo. But you got to remember that the flame damage and shock damage that Alambris does can also cause burning and concussion as well, and it's obviously more AoE damage. So that's why I take that anyway. Just in any sort of situation, any sort of fight, I'll just stay with Alambris. The 5-piece set we are using is Mechanical Acuity. Julianos works just as well here. Mechanical Acuity is still best in most situations, but in certain situations where Mechanical Acuity, like bosses with damage shields and things like that, then you probably would be better off with Julianos. If you're in a really long-winded fight and your group's DPS is not very high, if you're in an average tier raid group, then I would suggest using Julianos over Mechanical Acuity. So just keep that in mind. So we have everything on the body is divines, and everything is enchanted with Max Magicka. We have a heavy Alambris shoulder and a medium mask. Ideally we would have a heavy helmet and medium shoulders, but that's just what I had in my inventory. The 3-piece set we're using on our jewellery is 3-piece Moondancer. Infallibly for Moondancer, Willpower, they all work here. I just preferred Moondancer. Infallibly for if you pair it with Mechanical Acuity, is not as good, because you tend to want less crit, because obviously when Mechanical Acuity procs you have 100% crit, so then the extra crit that you get from Infallibly is not worth it. You're better off with a flat damage bonus like Max Magicka from the Moondancer. You can also use double lightning if you want, and use Netch's Touch. Netch's Touch is still a really good set, so you have loads of options on the Magicka Sorcerer. You could use Netch's Touch, you could use Julianos, Mechanical Acuity. You could use, if you're running double flame and you're a Dark Elf, you can use Burning Spellweave. So it's playing towards your classy strengths and stuff like that. So now I'm going to go over the skills. On the front bar we have Crystal Fragments, Force Pulse, Inner Light, Haunting Curse, Bound Aegis, and Shooting Star. If you want to slot something else other than Shooting Star with a bit more group utility, the Summon Storm Atronaut is really powerful this patch. They've just buffed it. And it also grants Major Berserk. So basically it gives a synergy, and if an ally activates that synergy, they get Major Berserk, increasing their damage done by 25% for 8 seconds. So that's always worth it. It's entirely up to you. I go with Shooting Star because generally we'll have Nightblades giving that buff, so well, Nightblades in Master Architect, so it becomes less effective, but it's still a really powerful ultimate, so I would suggest using it. On the back bar we are running Liquid Lightning. Blockade of Storms, Inner Light again, Hardened Ward, Bound Aegis and Thunderous Rage. Now I run Hardened Ward because it's a bigger shield and we have less health than last patch. If you feel comfortable with mechanics and the trials and your health, then I would suggest going with the other morph. I think it may be Conjured Ward or not Conjured Ward. I can't remember the morph anyway. It gives extra Magicka recovery to your group members, which is obviously better utility. If you want more sustain for yourself, then Harness Magicka would be probably the best option. But if I were to choose a different damage shield, it would be to benefit the group. So I would use the other morph of Hardened Ward. The reason we're using Inner Light on the back bar as well is because of a passive in the Mages Guild skill line called Magicka Controller, which increases your max Magicka and Magicka recovery by 2% for each Mages Guild ability slotted. I felt when I was using the Sork Execute Mage's Wrath, that I was losing a lot of recovery, losing a lot of sustain, and when you've got a perfected staff, I felt that instead of using your Execute, that carrying on with your rotation and keeping the status effects up was better for DPS than using the Execute. But if you want to go with the Execute, then I would suggest just replacing Inner Light like that. That is entirely up to you. I just prefer it this way. If you don't have a perfected staff, then, because I haven't tested the imperfect staff, but so if you don't have a perfected staff, then I would suggest putting your Execute on your back bar, because then you're not getting the extra damage with the Force Pulses. Right, now I'm going to go over the champion points. So in the green tree we have 28 into Warlord, 2 into Sprinter, 75 into Tenacity and Arcanist, 40 into Tumbling, and 20 into Shadow Ward. You could probably change these about depending on what trial you're in. So if you're in Hoth, then I would suggest more in Warlord. If you're in Vast, then I would suggest less. You won't even need many in, if any, in Warlord, because you don't really need a break free. So then I would pump everything into Tumbling or Shadow Ward. Regarding Arcanist and Tenacity, going over 75 is an absolute waste, because it takes you an extra 25 points to get an extra 1%. So anything over 75 I don't think you should take. In the blue tree we have 48 Elfborn, 56 Elemental Expert, 30 in Spell Erosion, 31 into Master at Arms, and 75 points into Thaumaturge. If you have an optimal group that has Infused Crusher enchants and Alkosh is up like a good amount of time, then I would suggest dropping 10 points out of Spell Erosion and just put it at 20, and then either put it into Elfborn or Master at Arms. But if you don't know what kind of group you're in and you don't know what the buff up times are and stuff like that, if they have Alkosh, if they have Crusher, then I just would suggest putting extra points into Spell Erosion. It all just depends on your group. And we have 75 points into Thaumaturge. As I said, on consoles we don't have like add-ons like the dressing room add-on to change your gear every boss fight at one click of a button. So you're better off finding a setup that is decent in all roles rather than just the best at one. Unless you're a Nightblade, then you just might as well spec for full single target. But as a Sorc, we have really good AoE, so I prefer to stick 75 points into Thaumaturge for the Exploiter passive, because as we all know, the adds cannot do not become immune to off balance. You can have a 100% off balance uptime on adds. It's only bosses that have a cooldown of off balance. So I just prefer 75 points into Thaumaturge. I also tested this on the 6mm dummy, and the Thaumaturge setup and the non-Thaumaturge setup was practically pretty much the same single target. So I think it's entirely up to you. I would stick with the Thaumaturge setup, but it's whatever you prefer. In the red tree we have 61 points into Ironclad, 13 into Spell Shield, 49 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, 40 into Thick Skinned, and 28 points into Bastion. So the green and the red trees are not as important. You do want to change them about a bit depending on what trial you're going in. Like certain trials don't have like poison and physical damage, or they have little poison and physical damage. So there's less point putting like extra points into Hardy. You might as well just stick it all in Elemental Defender and Spell Shield, etc. So just keep mind to where your damage is coming from and stuff like that. Right, so that's it for the champion points. Now I'm going to go over the rotation. So in Dragonbones, rotations became a little different. They actually became a bit situational. You need to worry about your resources more, and you need to worry about like off balance procs more. You need to watch for it for the double resource gain, because it's a DPS loss if you do a heavy attack and it's not an off balance target, because obviously you get extra damage for it being an off balance target, and you get double resources. And you, as a sorcerer, because we have poor sustain, you do need to heavy attack. The only real class that I don't think needs to heavy attack is Mageblade. If it's a short fight, then you won't need to heavy attack, and that's awesome. If it's a long-winded fight, then you will need to pick your points when to heavy attack. The thing about it is, I could give you a rotation that works on the 3mm dummy, and it'd just be a constant rotation because you know when off balance is going to go off. But in a trial, fights are longer, you're not going to know when off balance is going to go off. So you need to like be prepared for that. But basically the rotation is, I will use my potion, I will then curse, switch bars, Destro ult, liquid lightning, light attack, well light attack, liquid lightning, light attack, blockade, switch bars, and I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just remember that frags take priority, so if you proc a frag, then that's 2, 3, 4, 5. Always do 5 force pulses on your front bar when you're in like burst phases, and then I'll just switch back to my back bar. Always put in Haunting Curse back up when it drops off. Just remember it blows up twice. So then I'll just do the same type of rotation. Obviously, only heavy attack when you need to, or if you see an off balance proc and your dots are still up. It's very crucial to make sure your damage over times is still up, otherwise you lose massive amounts of DPS. Just heavy attacking with no dots down or anything like that. So you really need to time what you're doing, or like be aware of what you're doing. So that's the initial part of the rotation. In the event that you need resources back, say like you get to 50% magicka and you want to bump your resources back up, or a potion is just coming off cooldown, then I would, because I always suggest to use a heavy attack when a potion's coming off cooldown. You get the max amount of resources then, and then you can go back into full spam mode, full burst mode. So say I've just done my curse, switch back, I'd do my dots, switch back, 1, 2 actions, and then heavy attack, and then reapply your dots again. 1, 2, keep curse up, heavy attack. That is just for the periods that you need to sustain. Other than that, you will always do 5 actions on your front bar. 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to speed the rotation up a little bit and show you it fast. So first of all, we would potion, pray, not pray, curse, Destial dots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Switch bars. Same again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'm getting that at 50% magicka, so 1, 2, switch bars, heavy attack. Reapply my curse. 1, 2. Obviously we'd have elemental drain, so sustain would be a hell of a lot better. But right now we don't have elemental drain. Just remember that we'd have elemental drain, we'd have orbs, shards, everything like that. And then in execute phase, I just continue with the rotation. If the enemy is very low, then I will just continuously spam force pulse and crystal frags until the boss is dead. Obviously keeping your wall of elements up. And same goes for if you're using the execute, which I'll slot that now just to show you. Just give me a second to find it. Right, if you're using the execute method, then all you do is around about 15%, you'd keep your dots up and then spam. I'd spam it about four times maybe. Oh, I just reactivated it then. And then you just keep spamming till it's dead. Making sure when it's down to the last 5%, then I would just keep wall of elements up and keep spamming your execute. And if you're in AoE situations, then obviously you would, in groups, you normally time your Destral, so obviously you're going to drop a Destral at this point, so right, Don, it's your time to drop an execute. So I drop my ultimate and then do my dots. I like putting Haunting Curse up on adds just because it does AoE damage. So you do that, you do 2 heavy attacks and then just reapply your dots. Obviously Haunting Curse is still up, so 2 heavy attacks again. But that's just in AoE situations. So that is the build. If I have left anything out, please leave it in the comment section. Be sure to check out my social media, my Facebook, my Twitter and my Discord channel. Discord is probably the best way to reach me if you have any questions. It'll be the fastest response you get from me. And thank you for watching, guys. If you like this build, please like, share and leave a comment. And watch out for the DPS clips that are coming on next. So thank you very much, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Close your eyes. Would you dream for me? Some paradise. Tell me who you see, 'cause I think I do want you next to me. Want you next to me, but does this work? 'Cause I know I can't get to you. I like the chase, and I know you do too. Am I just in love with the idea of you? 'Cause I'd cross a million seas. Would you do that for me? Yeah, I'd fly this whole world twice if I could be your paradise. Close your eyes. Will you dream for me? Some paradise. Tell me who you see, 'cause I think I know what you mean to me. What you mean to me, but does this work? Only 'cause we never say what we think. Waiting for the perfect way. Time don't speak. Got me on delay. 'Cause across a million seas, would you do that for me? goddamn world 3 times, and I'd run all the red lights across a million seas just to have you next to me. Paris and Tokyo, I'll go where I have to go. Screw geography, but would you do that for me? Dream for me some paradise. Tell me who you see, 'cause I think I know what you mean to me. What you mean to me. But does this work? Only 'cause we never say what we think. Waiting for the perfect way. Time